Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. Guys, today I'm going to be joined by Lynn Davenport, an activist and Texas conservative activist who agrees, I think, with me and many of you on many Republican issues. But when it comes to the issue of school choice, we have a disagreement. And so today we're going to have an opportunity to have a discussion. I did one of these with Nikki Truesdell, maybe... I haven't even looked back, but probably a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and got a lot of great feedback from people on both sides of the issue on how that went. And with this being a policy that is front and center going on this session, I wanted an opportunity to have Lynn on and talk about this. Lynn and I had exchanged some conversations about this back during the primary. I think it was like January or February. And I had told her at that point, hey, we really do need to have a conversation after the primary about this. And now we're getting around to doing it. So it's probably taken me too long to have this, but I did want to make sure to bring this conversation to you because it is likely that the Texas House is to vote on school choice soon. And so having this conversation now at least provides context for each and every one of you as this policy is voted on likely in the coming weeks. Before we get to that conversation, I did want to bring two main things to your attention. Actually, maybe three. One is that there continues to be pushback that conservative House members are giving to House leadership. And in fact, I'm going to go to a very brief update from Representative Andy Hopper and Representative Shelley Luther that they shared that I think will just help kind of give you a taste of what some of our more conservative stalwart fighters are doing for you and how they're trying to shape and push for a more conservative session. Let's go to this clip real quick.
Hey, Patriots. Well, today I am joined by the actual Patriot, Shelley Luther, HD 62, which is Grayson County. And I, first of all, just wanted to thank you all for tuning in. We are today actually kind of in the midst of day 42 of session. Shelley, how much has this chamber gotten done so far?
Zero.
Yeah.
Zero things.
Zero things.
We did get to recognize Beyonce, though. I think
right.
that was worth the taxpayers' dollars for sure.
Talk a little bit about the recognitions. You've been dealing with a lot lately.
I turned in a resolution last week to honor the hospital that actually saved my life almost 2 years ago when I had a brain aneurysm and almost died. So that hospital, or some of the staff from there, they were actually in the House gallery and we knew they were coming. So we turned a resolution for me to thank them.
Yeah, so you're going to be on the floor and say, hey, thank you for saving my life. It's a big deal, right?
It's total. Well, I thought it was a big deal until Jared Patterson said that's not a big deal, and it got denied.
They denied you, and then what happened? Like they ended up getting recognized that same day, but not by you.
No, by a Democrat, just one or two spots before mine. And then they thought that was their recognition, so they left the gallery to where I just had to cancel my recognition because there was basically no one left in the House to recognize. It was awesome. What about you? What happened to you?
One of my very best friends was Jill Glover. She actually passed away last year, and I thought it appropriate for this chamber to recognize someone who made more of a difference, honestly, into what we as conservatives are fighting for. Jill Glover was the legislative priorities chair for the Republican Party for 2 sessions. And so she's greatly missed. We put together a resolution, had a number of co-signers, joint authors. I mean, it was going to be a thing. I invited the family to come to the chamber that day. We were going to present the family with a flag and, with a printed copy of the resolution, try to make it special for her accomplishments as a conservative activist. And that was it. I came in that morning and it was not a resolution. It was a for recognition, which may seem like this minor change, but it's a significant change. And so I asked, hey, what's going on with this? And I was told it was rejected. So anyways, once we peeled back the covers on that, we found out that both of ours were rejected.
And it's not because of any technicality. It's basically retaliation because we're voting to not have long weekends. We didn't vote for this current speaker. We're speaking out against all of the money that the Democrats are getting as vice chairs. So we are getting reprimanded for that, which is fine.
Yeah, well, anyways, we're big people. We're able to deal with it, but we want you to understand what the culture is down here and what we're fighting against. It's a huge deal to basically stand up against a system that really is just a few guys that decide how an entire chamber that represents the seventh largest economy operates, and we're here to change that. That's what we're fighting for you about. And like one of the things that we're tracking is that like we have a $56 billion of new revenue plus surplus that we are going to be unfortunately spending. That's what we're here to stop. Like we want to make sure that that goes back to you. So
we don't want to talk about how we'll spend your money. We actually don't want to spend it. We want to give it back to you.
That's what our goal is. So, make sure that you join the fight, because we are going to change the way that this body operates. I don't care if it happens this session. I don't care if it happens next session. We're fighting for you. So we so appreciate you. Thank you.
As you can see, people like Andy Hopper, Shelley Luther, and a lot of other conservatives down there are trying to fight to get the House moving. And I've talked about this a little bit a couple weeks ago. I talked about the clock and explaining the clock. If you want to go back and listen or watch that episode, which is a couple weeks old, you can. I will give you just a few facts that I think are relevant. So as of yesterday, and more might get done today, but as of yesterday, the Texas Senate had passed 6 bills on the floor of the Senate and referred, this is actually even the more important thing, referred 1,190 bills to a committee. So when it comes to all the Republican policy that many of you care about and I care about, whether it's immigration or health freedom or education, all of these issues, these bills are being sent to committees. Those committees can now take them up. They can consider them, and you're seeing those bills being heard, being committee hearings happening, policy being discussed. On the Texas House side, most of the committees have not yet met. And the ones that even could meet or have met, some of them don't even have bills referred to their committee. So even if the committee wanted to take up and consider legislation, and they could have hearings on any legislation right now, they're not doing so. Now, while the Texas Senate has referred 1,190 bills and actually passed 6 and sent them to the House, the Texas House has referred 35 bills. I might be wrong, but I'm almost certain that almost all 35 of those were referred yesterday, or if not, I think all of them were. So you can see there's not this big rush on the House side. Some of the members I've talked to have said they haven't even heard from their chairman, or they've heard, hey, we'll get together at some point soon. I'll let you know. Right. And so we're here on day 40 some odd of the House session, of the Texas legislative session, and there still does not seem to be in the Texas House this rush to accomplish as much conservative policy as possible. So just be aware, that's one reason why this discussion is continuing. The last thing I'm going to say is that if you have not followed this, there is massive scandal going on with the Texas Lottery Commission. And I'm not going to have time on this show to talk about this. I will likely be discussing this in future episodes. But the reality is that we have a number of issues. One is that this private equity group, which we now know, came in and bought $25 million $1 tickets. $25 million $1 lottery tickets to win a jackpot that was worth more than $25 million. And what we now know is that this private equity group literally worked with the Texas Lottery Commission to facilitate this fraud. Okay. The government had to basically create a scenario for them to even be able to buy this many tickets. You can't show up to 7-Eleven and buy $25 million $1 tickets. And so they had done the math knowing that they would make money if they did this, and the Lottery Commission facilitated that. We now have an even bigger scandal that Dan Patrick has brought to light with the fact that there was this courier that was evidently owned by maybe one of the sports betting companies that bought an $83 million winning lottery ticket. The Attorney General this morning announced an investigation into that lottery ticket sale and the potential fraud committed. The Texas Senate had a hearing where they lambasted the Texas Lottery. This has happened now multiple times, and they have passed a bill to ban the courier services, but Texas Lottery is also up for sunset, which just leaves a massive amount of room for total reform or elimination of this really corrupt agency that is government legalized predatory gambling, right, on people who we know honestly can't afford it. I mean, you and I, for the most part, our listeners are probably not the ones buying all the lottery tickets. These are people who are on food stamps, who are on free and reduced lunch programs, and all these other things. So keep your eyes and ears out. Texans for Fiscal Responsibility has been keeping people updated if you want to go somewhere to be updated on where this is going. With that being said, I want to get to my discussion with Lynn Davenport. So Lynn, thank you for joining me. today. And I do know it's taken me a little while from our communication in February where I said we'd sit down and have a conversation on this. And so thank you for being patient with me. But I did want to have this conversation. I know you and I have had private conversations, but I think having some of these in a public setting where people can at least see the various different perspectives would be helpful. So why don't you share? You can start off by just kind of sharing, give us 2 to 3 to 4 minutes of your position on school choice and what concerns you about this policy.
Thank you for having me, Luke. Well, it depends on the audience as to, which direction I go, because there are people in our party. So when I speak to the Republican Party, then I point to the hypocrisy of school choice and how it violates many of the principles of the party. And so if I'm speaking to public school parents, then it's a different discussion. But overall, the party talks a lot about choice and parents having the choice to send their children to public school, private school, charter school, homeschool. We have that choice right now. I think what we often do is we conflate money with choice. And so really what the vouchers and the education savings accounts are about is money. And so I'm vehemently opposed to the government running government-regulated school choice. Why would we flee the government schools, our public schools, only to accept the government-regulated school choice, which is what a voucher or an education savings account is?
Got it. I will share my position in general, and then why don't we just have an opportunity to ask each other a couple questions to maybe get at more specifics as to what each of us means with the words we're using, the definitions, and kind of our position. But my overall view, I've talked about this on the program. School choice has been something that I've been at least somewhat aware of and cared about since my entrance into politics at 16 years old. Carter Castile was one of the most liberal Republicans in the Texas House when my dad ran against her. We'd done nothing in politics before that and decided to run against her. Some people in our church actually who were Terry Hall. Some people know her. She's a leading toll road activist, runs Texans for Toll-Free Highways. So she had been involved in local transportation fights, and she went to church with us and asked us if we would be open to considering a run. My dad decided to do it. And school choice was, of course, one of those issues that was discussed even at the time. It was a debate in the Texas House. So I've been around this issue for a long time. My overarching position is that the government currently has a bit of a monopoly on people who are wanting to look at educational options that are provided for free, meaning the government is paying for it. And there's all these statistics about exactly how much money the government is spending. It really depends on how much debt the school district has and other things like that. But we know it's well over $10,000. It's probably $15,000, $16,000, but there's certain districts that are sitting on, $50,000 of debt per student. So we have this situation where we already in our budget spend, I believe, over $90 billion on public education. So these are things that constitutionally we provide. We say, hey, if you want to send your kid here, that works. There's also the charter school options, which are also public schools. They do not receive the same amount of funding as traditional public schools. They receive more the allotment side, but not the facilities side of funding. But those are growing substantially. We see that there is this desire for parents, when you give them more options, to look at those different options. And of course, I was homeschooled. My wife was homeschooled. Our kids go to a collaborative private school, which is 2 days a week in, 3 days a week at home, kind of a mix. And so I love the private and the homeschool options that families have. I care about those families having the ultimate freedom to decide how to educate their kids, and freedom from government regulations. One of the things I appreciate about not only this school choice program, but other school choice programs across the nation is that there's nothing compulsory in the policy. There's nothing that requires parents to participate. And if parents decide to homeschool their kids and don't even want to participate in an ESA program, there's zero regulations. Same with the private school options as well. So I think that parents are still protected, but ultimately we have a situation where a lot of our kids are educated, the vast majority, in these public school systems. And introducing more and more competition into that scenario is going to not only benefit the children who are given other options. Some people are served very well by traditional public schools, but some people would take another option if they could afford it. And having an education savings account where the money follows the child benefits that person. It also benefits the school that those children leave. We've seen studies in Florida and others where you see that the overall actual outcomes of public schools increase. And the reality is that many of our kids are being indoctrinated in these schools. Parents need other options to be able to move out from the traditional public school to other options. And an education savings account provides that. I think it's a good thing that you see the teacher unions and all of these groups that benefit from this system where they get all this money and then can offer this. And it's not free, right? They say it's free public school, but the reality is they can offer it freely to everybody because the government and we are all paying the bill, right? So we are all paying that bill, and recognizing that introducing more competition to that is better for everyone is something that I think Texans would benefit from as a whole, not only the students that get the ESAs. Okay. So, Lynn, my question is, with the existing Senate Bill 2 and HB 3, are there specific things in that legislation? Because we can talk about school choice as a whole, but it comes in different forms and fashions. Are there specific things in those bills that have been both passed the Senate and been introduced in the House that concern you?
Yes, and I struggle with the internal dilemma that, do I go and line by line and attack the bills? Because the bills come every session. I've been speaking against them since 2016. So I can speak to the merits or the lack of merit in these bills. They don't all differ that much because we've never seen a clean bill, and we know the governor won't sign a clean bill. And a clean bill to me is one that doesn't have the strings. And that's something that the party has expressed interest in, no strings attached. And that was put in, at the convention, or kept in, I should say, at the GOP convention. Well, so Senate Bill 2, and we've got a fiscal note on that. It's $1 billion. We don't have the fiscal note on House Bill 3, which will be that they'll host a hearing on March 4th for people interested in that. So on House Bill 3, it supposedly takes the strings out, but I see things in there that I didn't see in Senate Bill 2. And like, you can go to page 28 and 29. It actually adds a longitudinal data collection mechanism. I think that's egregious. We already have enough of that in our public schools, which I've been fighting. And so when I say I struggle, my internal dilemma is I want to talk about solutions to lift up our traditional public schools. I'd like to get back to the solutions of time-tested learning, the things that you want for your own children, the things that I received and my own children in the public schools. That's something that we don't spend enough time talking about. I'd like to say what we want to see, and that is to return to a classical model of education. And I think that aligns with our party principles and our sovereignty as individuals. And education is a huge one. Number 7, having an educated populace. And then number 9 is the free enterprise. And so unencumbered by government interference or subsidies. And I think it violates that. It does. You mentioned a monopoly, and I hear that a lot, that our public schools are referred to as monopolies. And when I was in school, and when I speak to groups, grassroots groups, I say, raise your hand if you went to public schools. Most of the people raise their hand, and raise your hand if they referred to it as a monopoly. Well, they didn't, because that's a marketplace term. That marketplace is the public schools are viewed as a marketplace now, a captive market. And it's in our Constitution. My friend Meg told Corey DeAngelis last night at a debate, if you don't like what's in our Constitution, then try to lobby for an amendment on that. If you don't want compulsory education and taxpayer funded that's provided under Article 7 or made provision for, then why aren't you lobbying for the removal of that. So it is constitutional to provide an education for 90, right now we've got 90+% of our kids in public schools. That's 5.4 million children. There are 6.1 million children in Texas. So the 700,000 who we are not paying for, we could potentially be paying for if these bills pass, because they get the camel's nose under the tent if the bill passes, and then it grows like Arizona. And so I think that's a burden on our taxpayers that they're not realizing. I think they think that you drain the public schools only to shift the money into the private hands. And that is true to some degree if all the students leave the public schools. But we're still going to absorb the cost of those we are not educating now. And I think it changes the landscape. And this is why Nikki Truesdale does, our homeschool friend, does not support government regulated school choice, because even though a parent can opt in, they don't have to do it as a homeschool or private schooler. That changes the landscape of Texas education. And you can see the case of that in Maine. So by that, I mean that they will come after the private and homeschoolers. And the best way to target those is to dangle the money. And you and I agree on the wasteful spending in education. I do believe that the school districts and the ISDs are both victim and villain. I went up against my school district. I sued them for the masks because of mask mandates. I'm not a blind cheerleader for the ISDs, but I am a huge supporter of returning to our traditional, our classical model of education that we once received in our public schools through legislation. I know your dad was in the legislature. Through legislation, not only state, but federal intrusion has really changed how we educate kids. And these teachers they're under the stronghold of the accountability system, which came from Bush testing. We spend millions upon millions on vendors and contracts and consultants and nonprofits through the TEA. So yes, we're spending $90 billion, but I don't think that we're spending enough time going after those contracts. I think we should go after the mothership, abolish the TEA while we're talking about abolishing the Department of Education. Trump told me to my face in Austin at a rally that he was going to end the Department of Education 8 years ago. What did he do? He grew it. He appointed Betsy DeVos as the education secretary, and she's been working for 30 years to undermine public schools. So I do not see the solutions at the legislature. I think the bills create more problems. I think these bills are Trojan horses. House Bill 3 is a terrible bill. And, if you look at it, how I have a question for you, Lucas. How do we reconcile House Bill 3 with the principles of the party? And if you go through the list of those, I see multiple violations. Number 4, smaller government. This bill grows government. It's not a clean bill. That's a lot.
No, that's okay. Yeah. I'm going to try to recall a couple of the points you made. So one of my thoughts was regarding the TEA. I know there's been a lot of pushback on the TEA. I think conservatives in the legislature are actually pushing to abolish the TEA. And many of those that are doing it, I don't actually know anybody who opposes school choice and wants to abolish the TEA legislatively, meaning the legislators, not you yourself, but the legislators, right? The opponents of school choice, who are Republicans and Democrats, also support the TEA. And then on the other side, the people who are pushing for school choice, many of them also oppose the TEA and oppose some of these other top-down approaches to education. I don't think, for the most part, those who have pushed school choice, myself included, have presented it as this silver bullet to education. I think that's one of the things that sometimes gets pushed back against. But where you and I might agree is on, bringing more patriotism back into our classrooms, bringing prayer back into schools, putting the 10 Commandments back into classrooms. Governor Abbott talked about, teachers who are trying to convince little girls that they can become little boys, losing their job if they're going to sit there and socially transition. Those are things that would definitely continue to move our schools in the right direction. Fighting for better curriculum, standards that, all of those things more beneficial. There's a lot of problems. I volunteered at an after-school program downtown San Antonio for years and worked with a lot of kids in these inner cities on basic reading and math, and recognizing the fact that they are so behind their grade level when you sit down and talk to them, and just having somebody to have the time to work on some basic mathematic principles that they clearly weren't taught. This No Child Left Behind that basically means that everybody moves on whether they're actually ready or not, right? So those are some things we can agree on separate from school choice. TEA, regarding that, you brought up Maine. You brought up this kind of concern. I hear the term used, the nose under the tent, the camel's nose under the tent. I think it's worth recognizing that in Republican states, Florida and others that actually enact school choice, they do not use that. There's a couple things I think are worth pointing out. One is that you don't see them then use that to try to regulate private homeschoolers all across the state, pass these statewide regulations. We haven't seen that. You can look at a state like Maine that does have Democrat dominance, right? They just censured a legislator and told her she can't talk for merely saying that a boy can't be a girl, right? So it doesn't surprise us that a state like Maine also wants to regulate homeschoolers or private schoolers, or a state like California wants to regulate homeschoolers or private schoolers. And those states...
Right, but Maine took the point of that one was that Maine took the school choice dollars, and then they ruled it with the Human Rights they amended their Human Rights Act, and that then made it to where the private school cannot discriminate based on religion or any other.
Understood. And I would say that I don't think anybody would be surprised that a Democrat state would take any and all measures to try to further regulate private schoolers and homeschoolers, right? And there are many states growing up, and we'd have to give different people directions on how to do this. And in Pennsylvania and other states like that, you'd have them. I mean, literally the school district can come in and look at your curriculum as a homeschool family in the state of Pennsylvania. Right. They didn't wait for school choice to do that, right? They passed that law.
Or for that, if you read the bill, you can see the slippery slope in a current legislature can't bind a future.
I would disagree that we're opening the door, meaning that any future legislature can regulate homeschooling, and they can do it with or without an education savings account program. I think that the education savings account program is a program that's set up to say, if you have parents who are trying to seek out other educational opportunities for their kids, they can apply for this program. If they get an education savings account, they can use that to get into a school that they otherwise would not have been able to get into. And that opens up more competition in the marketplace. You don't need that to regulate homeschoolers and private schoolers. You don't. There are blue states all across America that regulate homeschoolers and private schoolers, and their teacher unions also make sure that they don't have any school choice. And the reason being that both the regulation of homeschoolers and private schoolers and the keeping school choice out of that state benefits the public education system from not having the competition, and then also from still imposing the government's will on these private schoolers and homeschoolers. Unlike what you see in the red states, where education savings accounts will grow because more and more people are looking for other alternatives. And that actually provides a market-based incentive for school districts to not have indoctrination and to return to a more classical form of public education, because they are going to lose students if they do not. And so the more you put in those alternatives, the more you see that. We've seen that, I think, with the charter school movement in certain areas where charters have really blown up, the Rio Grande Valley being one of them, where the public schools are competing to keep these kids in public school because the charter schools are opening up and more parents are flocking to those education institutions. Where the parent has the choice, they're choosing these other options because clearly they think that their kids are getting a better education.
I understand the market forces of charter schools. Those were proposed in the 90s. I don't know if your dad was a legislator then, but they came in the 90s, and it's to me, it's just another example. It's taxation without representation. They do receive public funds, but they're public-private partnerships, and they don't have locally and democratically elected boards, but also their business deals, their real estate deals. And charters were supposed to lift all boats, which is what they're saying about the vouchers. There are a lot of parallels with the sales pitches on charter schools, and charter schools sadly don't outperform our mediocre public school results. So it was supposed to be a rising tide to lift all boats. It's a redistribution of wealth. It created a second lane of education, and now you're about to create a third one with vouchers. And the other thing is redistribution of wealth came through recapture and Robinhood, which I know Representative Schatzline said at a debate on Monday that he's trying to go after that, which I appreciate. We should. Ken Paxton was on Tucker Carlson talking about how we got recapture, and he was wrong on how it came, but he was right about it being socialism. And I see this as being no different. It's government interference and subsidies for education, and it doesn't solve. I mean, can I ask you this? What is the problem we're trying to solve here with vouchers and education savings accounts? I don't think we're going to get that with the proposal of House Bill 3 or Senate Bill 2. And I think that it's a very dangerous, slippery slope. And it violates so many of the party principles. I think we need to get back to that and ask ourselves, what can we do as public figures to point back to the solutions for our traditional public schools? And how were they broken? And how did they get where they are? Well, they were broken through decades of legislation, which we've been in charge, the Republicans, starting with Governor Bush in the 90s. This has been going on for 3 decades. I think we need to repeal the bad bills that came through our legislature and have really destroyed our public schools. And I don't, like I said, our public schools don't get a pass from me. I've tried to run for school board, and it's very difficult. I was called a Trumper and a radical Tea Partier and all those things. Now I'm being called a Democrat because I don't support school choice. And they're saying, oh, well, you must be like Kamala. It's a false dilemma fallacy. And I don't think that there's anything conservative about vouchers. And I think your audience is, they're very engaged. And I think that we would be wise to question these bills and advocate for, I don't fight for school choice vouchers or tax credits or exemptions. But if we had to point to a cleaner bill, then why wouldn't we be supporting an exemption where the money never gets laundered through the government and creates a bureaucracy run through the comptroller? I mean, do you know how awful it's going to be to manage the fraud, waste, and abuse on this if it's up to $30,000? And that's for special needs kids. But these parents are going to want to take that money because the public schools, they set a cap in 2004, and that was Grusendorf. Kent Grusendorf, over the Education Committee, the one who's leading the charge on vouchers, was the one who helped break the system in the first place. How do we reconcile that, Luke?
So let me answer the question on kind of what's the issue that we're trying to solve.
Yes.
And I was actually thinking about your answer to charter schools, where you talked about, hey, these aren't even really working. I go back to this fundamental belief that I see sometimes as a divide in my perspective of how I hear the opponents of these options talking about versus my view. I really do believe that the more the parent is empowered, the better off the educational outcomes of that child will be. You have I think it's 1 million, it's definitely in the hundreds of thousands of students of parents that are literally just waiting to get into a charter school, right?
That's a mythical list. I've tried to find that, and it's actually
not a mythical list. And I know people on waiting lists, and I know people who are very grateful that they have kids in. Great Hearts is a good example here in San Antonio. Tons of families are in Great Hearts.
They don't take all kids. They don't take the special needs, the ELL, the behavior problems. They can send them back to the public school.
Again,
we have to take all kids.
Again, I want to go back to the fact that you're talking about what is the problem being solved. Mm-hmm. The more options that every parent has, right? Even when you say, okay, well, my preference would be that every single education institution has to take all kids, right? Well, I don't think you'd want that, because if the school choice program did that, if they said, hey, private school, you have to take every kid with an ESA, you'd say, oh, that's a government regulation. That's bad. That's a string attached. But then when the charter school is given the option to say, hey, we don't have to take every single kid. We are in this second category of a traditional public school, which is getting a lot more funding than we are. We're a separate alternative.
You just said basic allotment.
What?
They have a higher basic allotment in charters. It's not a fair shake.
They get less money.
They can't
higher
take
basic.
debt like
Yeah, but that's a teacher union talking point, because when they say higher basic allotment, it is one aspect of all the money that public
I know how the
education are
buckets
getting.
work.
Traditional public schools are getting far more money than charter schools, and they know that. And ultimately, if you both have a checking account
should
and way
get
more
more
shows
money.
up in your account than the others, and you're still complaining, and then you find the one aspect of the line item that they get a higher amount in and say, oh my gosh, we have less money. You go, no, you have
They
way
should
more
get more
money.
money than charter schools. Charter schools are real estate deals. That's who invests in them.
No, they're not real estate deals.
Yes, they are.
They are literally education institutions that are serving tons of families, and no family is forced to go to a charter school.
No,
if I live in Northeast ISD and I'm a family, I get in, my kids are going to this school. I know the school they're going to. I have to go and apply. And that's what's interesting to me is when people oppose even something like a charter school or an ESA program, you're opposing something that you don't have to participate in. Nobody you know that doesn't want to participate in this program has to participate. It's only those who want to freely engage and say, this is a charter school I would like to attend. This is a school I would like to attend if I qualify for this ESA. And if I don't qualify for this ESA, I might still stay in this school that I'm fighting the teacher, I'm fighting the administration behind the different things that are indoctrinating my kids. Now, I support more and more policy to fix traditional public schools. I don't think we've presented it as an either or
Corey
situation.
Ambrose said the same thing last night at a debate with my friend Meg Bakich that Scorecard put on, and he made the same argument. I don't think that we are not doing both because our governor, you know this. I mean, I know you helped lead the charge to get rid of Democrat chairs, but our governor has appointed a Democrat to 4 boards and commissions. And I did call out your name at convention and said, Luke Macias, let's talk about Commit and Todd Williams. And they are driving much of the legislation. But our governor, his number one priority, even though we bumped it down to number 9, at the convention, all those top 8 priorities that we set at the convention, our governor is not concerned with. His number one agenda is school choice. If you look at how he tweets, that's all he talks about. And when he brings people into his office, the legislators, and I say they go sit on Santa's lap, it's like, what would you like? What would you like? Well, the governor is basically saying, I'll give you what you want. You just give me my school choice vote. I think it's disgusting how he unseated his own party. We can debate on some of those were rhinos, but why is he not going after the Democrats? Why is he not using his war chest to help people like me who run for school board at the local level, using his bully pulpit to say, vote for this girl instead of the Democrat who works for a Gates-funded public-private partnership? He's not doing that. He's not on my team. He doesn't represent me. And what do we do? Because he can't be unseated because his war chest is so massive. Jeff Yass, the TikTok billionaire from Pennsylvania, is donating to my governor to unseat these people and to push school choice. It's an agenda, it's a Trojan horse, and I'm shocked that you're supporting it because it does all the things that our party is against. How can we reconcile this, Luke? And how can we ever get any progress or make any change and repeal these bills if all we talk about is school choice? It sucks the oxygen out of every session. I don't know how to say it any louder. We've got to return to what works, how you and I learn the basics, and pay and train the teachers with the money saved on the wasteful technology vendor bills. It's so egregious. And this is all we can talk about is these stupid voucher bills. And I'm part of the problem when I feed it. I mean, even arguing against it is still talking about it,
The day started by prayer gatherings, meetings. Okay, logistically, here's what we're going to do. And
someone gets up, starts the whole show. I think we need some time. We need a break.
Yeah, that's where things started to go awry.
It's not often that Democrats cheer when a Republican gets elected.
First order of business is electing a new Speaker of the House of Representatives.
It's even less often that Democrats jump at the chance to participate in electing said Republican.
We have made it very clear that is a censurable offense. The Speaker should be elected without Democrats' support.
How did we get here? A Republican majority Texas House seemingly hijacked and coerced by the minority party. And why did Democrats get to choose the Speaker of the Texas House? We talk about that in our new documentary, Hijacked, How Democrats Chose the Speaker of the Texas House. Available February 26 at Texas Scorecard.
So, yeah. So one thing I'll say a couple things to the points you're making. One is, I am grateful that the governor did help unseat a lot of more liberal Republicans. And I think the policy issue that motivated him most was school choice. There were a lot of Republicans. It is true that if you look at the list of Republicans who oppose school choice, they also happen to be on anyone's list of the most liberal Republicans in the Texas House, right? It is
Morgan
a list
Meyer
of the
is my rep.
Republicans.
Sorry to interrupt, but he's my rep. He's for impeachment.
I understand.
He's for vouchers.
I'm not
for
saying
casinos. He's like, whatever you want, Governor, I'll do your bidding.
I'm not saying that there aren't those who are ranked on the more liberal. I'm not saying that there aren't those who are on the more liberal side that also do support school choice.
Sure.
There are some of those as well, Morgan Meyer being one of them. And I actually supported Morgan Meyer's primary opponent, Barry Wernick, last time, was a strong supporter of Barry. And so the point being that, yes, we will agree on other issues and other candidates because of those issues, but it is also true that what Governor Abbott did in the primary was team up with a lot of conservatives and grassroots people across the state, and Ken Paxton and the Republican Party of Texas and these groups to unseat a lot of very liberal Republicans who have opposed much of the Republican platform, including school choice. School choice is not the one single solution. And I don't think it works for those opponents of school choice to say, why aren't we talking about these other issues? Because what I know is this week I was talking to two activists who were meeting with legislators about the issue of porn in libraries. I've talked to people about putting God back into public schools. There's multiple different policies that do that.
They have Muslim prayer rugs in our high schools. They're already praying in our schools. It's just not there to Jesus.
There are many other policies being pushed this session and against the indoctrination in public schools to put further restrictions on what teachers can and can't do, whether they can and can't talk about gender and sex to all these kids, like the reform that the state of Florida passed. The Texas House killed that last time. Many of the Republicans that opposed that legislation lost in their primary. We now have the votes to pass that if Dustin Burrows allows it to come to the floor. There are issues like that many Republicans and conservatives are pushing. One of the things I am hopeful about is that, because I do predict and believe that school choice will pass this session. And when it does, my hope is that we can put that issue behind us and the next session be focused on continuing to do the things that we agree on when it comes to reforming the public school system.
Focus on growing it if they get it passed, they'll just focus on growing it
it should grow, and it will only grow if parents actually aren't being served well by the traditional public school system.
You're okay with paying for 3 lanes of education, and if virtual education passes, which I've heard it's going to pass.
I'm okay giving more parents more options.
No, I'm telling you,
virtual education, ESAs, charter schools. If you want to private school or homeschool separate from any of those programs, be completely unregulated, traditional public schools. If you have all those options, parents are going to be able to evaluate each of their children and then be able to know which ones are going to serve them best. And they might even start in a charter school and say, this really isn't working the way my friend said it was working for their kids. I'm going to go homeschool. I'm not going to homeschool anymore because this is a struggle. We're going to go into this private school. I might get
charter school.
One kid wants to go into a traditional public school. That's a good thing for parents to have those options. And when you say funding, the government is funding nearly $100 billion of education in the state of Texas to all of these students. We already fund. So I think it doesn't work to talk about how we're funding more. I don't actually believe that you're growing government, because if this child comes from the traditional public school system into an ESA program or over to a charter school, I don't see that as government expansion. I see that as the fact that the government is providing a massive amount of the money for the education of the Texas populace. And the more options you have in that, the better and higher quality education you'll get across the board. That's my belief. And so when you look at it as government growing into one area, I say government is spending all of this money. If this child stays in the traditional public school, we're spending a ton of money through that program as well. So the more options given, the more parents are empowered. And now they have direction over their kids' education more so than they ever did.
2 points is what I said before, is when you add the children who were not already paying for and private, and homeschool, that does grow government. I understand it that if all the students left the public schools, yes, that would drain the public schools, but it doesn't address the spending at the state and TEA. And the Abbott appointed Mike Morath 9 years ago. He's been in that office. This is, if we're failing in education for 9 years and math and reading and everything's going down, that's on Abbott. Why don't we point to him and say, dude, you got to fire him. He's failing at his job. We used to fail students. Now we fail schools and give them A through F ratings. I mean, we have so many things that we do now that we didn't do in the past that are wrong under Abbott's leadership. He's a Bush Republican. He's also a globalist. He's aligned with the World Economic Forum. This is a Trojan horse, and that's why it's his number one issue. And it does grow government if we absorb private and homeschool kids. And then with the charters, I'll make one point. They have to take the same STAR test. They have the same TEKS and standards that our public schools have. They hire uncertified teachers. People think that it's some sort of classical model. It can't be under those things. The things that we're fleeing our public schools, the charters don't solve. That's not a classical education. How could you support that? Charter schools are marketing and slick materials that parents, they don't understand. It's the same thing. It's the same monster, same beast. We're not fixing it.
Senator Phil Gramm was having a debate when Hillary Clinton was pushing this more socialistic socialist medicine across the United States. And he was our U.S. Senator from Texas at the time. And he was arguing with this person there. And he was talking about different aspects. And he said, well, how, I have a child who needs health care, and now you're going to be the one deciding whether or not they do or do not get it based on this system. And the individual federal bureaucrat at the time said, Senator, we love your child and care for your child. Mm-hmm. And Phil Gramm's response was, he said, okay, what is her name? And of course, this person does not know who Phil Gramm's daughter is. And here was Phil Gramm's point. You will never care about my child like I care about my child because you do not know them. So when we look at charter schools, great example as one. Mm-hmm. The only people who go to charter schools are individual families who voluntarily go and apply to get in. I know people on waiting lists for charter schools. These are parents who are involved in their kids' education and are pursuing other options that they believe will better benefit them. And they are engaged in their kids' lives like you and I would never be. And that is actually a fundamental belief that parent, the more they have the option to be engaged, the better their child's education will be. Because where one form of education will serve this child really well, it might not serve another child really well. So you could go to a charter school, put your kid in, and come out and go, I think this was just a bunch of slick marketing. I feel kind of fooled, and I want to leave. And the best situation is if we have a system set up to where you can just leave, which you can. Nobody's requiring you to go there. But the reason a lot of parents are there is because that's not what they feel. That's not what they believe. And as their child is progressing in reading, math, and all these other issues that they know they need to be instructed in to succeed in life, they go, this is doing so much better than wherever else we were. And if it's not, if they go, I'm comparing my child's experience here to what they were doing, and let's say the last thing they were doing was a traditional public school, they can go right back, right? And at that point, the funding that the state is sending to the charter school is now going to move over to the public school. That is a good system because the parent is now empowered to make that decision, because the vice principal and even the classroom teachers in both of those individual schools do not care for that child the same as the parent does. And so when that parent is given other alternatives, that's a better system. I believe there's a reason that that's been a consistent priority and part of a larger education reform package that Republicans like Donald Trump and others have pushed across the nation. And I think that's a good thing because that parent cares more.
Do you know the largest charter school chain in Texas?
I'm sure it's one of the Great Hearts or Idea, or there's like several of them, right? That are the 4 or 5 of them that are the larger ones.
It violates number 3, which is the sovereignty, American sovereignty. But it's the Gulen. It's the Islamic charters, and there are 85 now in Texas. And they send money back to Turkey. They have the H-1B visas. It's a national security threat. I can't believe our party and Dan Patrick support that. I can't reconcile that with our state sovereignty and individual sovereignty.
We can definitely discuss, one, the H-1B visa problem, also making sure that indoctrination is not happening in any and all schools, and continuing to give parents, not only regulate the schools that are indoctrinating, but then give parents other options so that they can leave and move. And both of those combined forces of both changing, reforming, and regulating the existing school system in such a way to prevent indoctrination and increase the excellence of education while also empowering parents more as a combination, I do believe is an educational system that will better serve the state of Texas. And I don't think there are states that are waiting for school choice to pass to decide to then regulate homeschooling. I don't think we can see examples of that. I don't think we have states that have waited for that. Blue states will regulate homeschooling. And we should always push against that. As somebody who was homeschooled my entire life, we should push against regulation of homeschoolers and private schoolers at all levels. The government program that is set up through an education savings account, this is the way I talk about how you want those funds restricted, right? So some people have argued, well, I don't want their definition of strings attached means if you say anything this money can or can't be spent on, then that's a string. Meaning if you say, hey, you can't use your ESA to take all your kids to Six Flags, right? You can't go buy an 80-inch TV and then say, oh, this was an educational expense because they watch YouTube videos on math on it. Now, no strings attached by some people's definition means literally that's all fair play. So you get a $10,000 ESA and that parent just has a debit card and they go swipe it wherever, right? Hey, they learned a lot about gravity, when we went to Six Flags. Now, I believe that it's a good thing that our food stamp program says things like, you can't buy liquor with your food stamps.
You just compared it to food stamps. So you just...
No, I'm saying any and all times that there are government programs where taxpayer money is spent, you should limit the things that that money can get spent on. And that is a good thing.
We don't want UBI, but we're okay with universal school choice, which is not really even universal because not everybody has tiered eligibility. It picks winners and losers. Luke, can you...
Again, you're literally talking about... No. Here's the difference, though. When you talk about this system, our current system in Texas is that we do spend a massive amount of money on the education of the children that are populous in Texas. It does not work for you to try to describe a school choice program as that is what is now bringing this general government system. Right? The government is the one that's educating the mass amount of the populace.
And now they're going to be
doing so badly. And it's doing so badly. And the more parents have options, the more they're the ones in the driver's seat. They're the ones making the decision.
But the money is supposed to follow the child. It actually goes straight into the government. It doesn't even subscribe to the Proposition 11 that our voters in the Republican primary.
I would disagree that
it doesn't follow the child. Like they literally does not, because it goes to the government and the government decides how you can spend it.
I would disagree with. I think when a child goes from a traditional public school into an ESA, or a traditional public school into a charter school, or a charter school back to traditional, any of these routes, money is shifting. And we know it's shifting because the basic allotment changes. Who's getting money from the government for those different forms is changing. That is by definition money following the child, which means that the parent is the one who is now actually more in charge than any system ever was, which also then provides the right incentives for anybody educating that child to provide as high a quality education as possible and to respond to parental concerns.
It's a subsidy. It violates the principle of number 9.
So the same way that parents can rise up and change their school boards, they can also, when they're empowered to take their kids out of that system because the school board is not listening, that provides even more financial incentives for that school district to say, hey, maybe we should respond. And that's the idea and principle behind why school choice is a fundamentally good thing for individual families and then also for the entire educated populace as a whole, because you're providing more options, which not only empower parents, but then also put checks and balances into the system as a whole. And so, and I do believe that saying, hey, these dollars they have to go towards educational expenses is a good thing. And I think when I talk to vast majority of Republicans that I discuss, they go, yeah. If you tell them, hey, do you think this money should go to Six Flags Fiesta Texas so that the kid can learn about gravity? They'll go, no. Okay, so is that a string attached? Well, no, I just mean, I don't want you to come in and say, you got to learn, you got to teach this and you got to say this and you have to choose the curriculum and all of that. That's what I believe the average Republican believes no strings attached means, which I also believe applies to both SB2 and HB3.
What about testing? Because the governor said that we have to have accountability measures. He won't sign a bill that doesn't have that. And that in other states means testing. And that's what he meant by it, is testing. And whether it's a norm reference test or the state test, Tennessee voucher recipients do the state test.
Yeah.
I think that's y'all don't want that. I can promise you, it's miserable.
I do. Yeah, I would oppose
victims of the accountability system. It's terrible.
I would oppose the state test being imposed on ESA recipients. I know a lot of conservative Republicans have, and that's one reason why there's not a state test in both the Senate and the House. The Senate never tried to impose the STAR test. The House did, but I do not believe they're doing it this time. A norms reference test. I took a norms reference test growing up as a homeschool student. We voluntarily did it.
Compromised and co-opted. They'll just destroy the norm reference.
We took a norms reference test as homeschool students. That was a voluntary decision. Also, by the way, if you're homeschooling your kids, you don't have to take that. But that being said, if you do go into the program, it all depends on what the final bill says. The accredited private schools that are receiving these ESAs are already taking norms reference tests. And I literally talked to a friend of mine who's on the board of a private school, and he was looking at it. He goes, yeah, all of our kids already take the norms reference tests. So you're not actually changing for that education institution. The child's coming in, the ESA, $10,000, is paying for their tuition so they can come in. The parent's empowered to now be even more involved in making that decision on what serves their child best. They're in the school and all the kids are taking the norms reference tests because that's part of being an accredited private school. And that's the private accreditation, not the government private accreditation. It's just a private accreditation. They take a norms reference test.
I know what it is.
And so I think that's a good thing. I don't think it's a problem to say, hey, let's continue to do that. You and I will have agreement on the STAR test needing to be vastly reformed, overhauled, eliminated, all of those things, all of the above, like the lottery I just talked about. And so, again, I do hope the next session we can continue to work on that. That might even be something that advances this session to some extent, and I hope it does. And so the same way we think the STAR test is bad for the public school system, it would be bad to in any way impose that on private or homeschoolers or anything. We should try to not only not impose it there, we should try to eliminate it for the traditional public schools. Well, hey, Lynn, why don't you do this? Give me, because we have been talking about this for a while, but just kind of...
I told you it was going to be longer than 20 minutes.
It was going to be longer than 25 minutes. I'm sorry, but you and I both have places we need to go. So thank you for talking to me. But that being said, why don't you kind of wrap up your perspective?
Yeah. Well, again, I've already outlined all of the party principles and how this violates that. And so those opposing government regulated school choice are conservatives who are locking arms with me, and we're going to speak out against it on March 4th. And we hope that people will pressure their legislators and tell them not to support this. And I thank you for the chance to talk about this. Familiesengaged.org is the organization that I represent. And you can find me on Twitter, Lynn S. Davenport.
Lynn, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Luke.
I hope y'all took some stuff away from that conversation. I appreciate Lynn coming on and sharing her different concerns over this program. There are conservative activists out there that I know that I have agreed on so many races. Like Lynn and I talked about, we both supported Barry Warnick, who only lost by a couple hundred votes against Morgan Meyer, who's one of the most liberal Republicans in the Texas House. I do agree with Morgan Meyer on the school choice issue, but I disagree with him on many other issues, like so many different legislators, one way or the other. Ultimately, I hope that each and every one of you, as you hear this, are aware that this is a policy that's being discussed. It is, of course, a policy that has been debated for a long time. I really do mean what I told Lynn, which is that I hope that as school choice is accomplished this session, which is my belief that it will be, that as we go into future sessions, more conservative activists will be completely united behind all of the education reform that we need to push to both reform the traditional public school programs and all the education for Texas children. Guys, there's so much going on, and I hope to be able to come to you every week. I am blessed to be able to come to you and give you updates on the legislative process and various policies that are happening. I wanted to have this discussion today, but I will bring you more updates in the coming weeks on specific conservative policies that are moving or are not moving. And that is going to be our goal of what we mostly want to focus on during the session, is telling you how are the traffic cops treating all of the conservative policies that so many of you care about. May God bless you, and may God bless Texas.
Be sure to subscribe to Texas Scorecard on YouTube and click that bell to ensure you're a real Texan. If you liked this video and want to see more citizen-driven journalism, be sure to click like and go to texasscorecard.com to read about all things Texas. Texas Scorecard, real news for real Texans.